courtroom frozen in silence. A woman draped across a sofa, her long legs crossed in tight capri pants, dark sunglasses hiding whatever truth lay behind her eyes. She answered every question with a slow, purring confidence that made the jury lean forward and the audience hold their breath. Was she a victim? Was she a schemer? Was she something far more complicated than either? That woman was Lee Remick, and that single scene, burned into the memory of everyone who ever watched Anatomy of a Murder, captured everything that made her extraordinary. She was alluring and unknowable at the same time, warm and dangerous in the same breath. Time magazine called her America's answer to Brigitte Bardot. Hollywood handed her Oscar nominations before she turned 30. Directors like Elia Kazan, Otto Preminger, and Blake Edwards fought to work with her. And yet, at the very height of her powers, Lee Remick walked away from the spotlight, crossed an ocean, and rebuilt her life entirely on her own terms. This is what really happened to Lee Remick. Before we delve into the rise and fall of this legendary icon, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching this video from. Sit back with a drink in hand as we journey back in time to an era where light shone brightly, but tragedies were even darker. Leanne Remick was born on December 14, 1935, in Quincy, Massachusetts, a quiet, respectable town just south of Boston. Her father, Frank Remick, ran a prosperous department store in Quincy, a steady, grounded man who believed in hard work and keeping both feet on the ground. Her mother, Margaret Remick, was an actress. From the very beginning, Lee inherited something from each of them. From her father, an unpretentious, down-to-earth quality that would later disarm every director and co-star she ever worked with. From her mother, a hunger for the stage that no amount of practicality could ever quite extinguish. When Lee was 7 years old, her parents separated. It was the kind of quiet family fracture that leaves marks a child carries for life, even when she never speaks of it. Margaret packed up the children and moved the family to New York City, where the pace was faster, the possibilities wider, and the world of performance suddenly very close. In Manhattan, Lee attended the exclusive Hewitt School, a world away from the department stores and neighborhood streets of Quincy. She studied dance, she dreamed of the stage, and she began the long, disciplined work of becoming someone the world would one day watch. For years, ballet was her obsession. She trained with the focused intensity of a girl who had decided very early exactly what she wanted. But it was not ballet that would make her famous. It was something she stumbled into almost by accident, and once she found it, she never looked back. In the summer of 1952, 16-year-old Lee secretly auditioned for a summer stock theater company in Hyannis, Massachusetts. There was just one problem. The company had an age requirement, and Lee did not meet it. So she lied. With the quiet nerve that would later serve her beautifully on screen, she told them she was old enough, secured the job, and only then let her parents find out. They were not pleased, but they allowed it. And that summer changed everything. When Lee and the rest of the young company arrived at their new theater, they found not a stage, not a building, but a hole in the ground and a large tent pitched on the edge of Cape Cod. It was hardly the glamorous debut she might have imagined. But Lee threw herself into it without hesitation. That summer, she performed 9 shows in 10 weeks, dancing by day and acting by night, running on nothing but enthusiasm and the dizzy joy of doing exactly what she was born to do. I never felt tired, she later recalled. I would have done anything they asked of me. Then came the moment she never forgot. She was given a few lines of dialogue in the musical Carousel. Small lines, almost nothing. But they were hers. They were my lines, and it was my show, she said years later, with a brightness in her voice that had not faded one bit. The girl from Quincy had caught the theater bug, and there was no turning back. By 1953, at just 17 years old, Lee made her Broadway debut in a short-lived comedy called Be Your Age. The show did not last, but Lee did. Bit parts in live television dramas followed over the next 2 years, each one a small step forward, each one adding another layer of craft to a talent that was quietly, steadily growing. Then, in February 1956, she appeared in a television play on Robert Montgomery Presents. It was a routine broadcast, unremarkable by any standard, except that on that particular night, one particular man happened to be watching his television screen. His name was Elia Kazan, and what he saw stopped him cold. Elia Kazan was not a man who wasted time. One of the most formidable directors in American cinema, the man behind A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, he recognized raw talent on sight. What he saw in Lee Remick that February night on his television screen was exactly that. He offered her a role in his new film almost immediately. The film was A Face in the Crowd, released in 1957, and it was a sharp, prophetic satire about the dangerous power of media and charisma. Lee played Betty Lou, a vivacious teenage baton-twirler who flirts her way into the orbit of a drunken drifter turned television demagogue, played with frightening conviction by Andy Griffith. Her screen time was brief, but her impact was not. One critic who encountered the film decades later wrote that Lee was literally stunning in the role. The way she shines, he observed, brings color to black and white photography. For a girl of 21 making her feature film debut, that was no small thing. But it was her next major opportunity that truly announced her arrival. In 1959, director Otto Preminger was assembling the cast for Anatomy of a Murder, his bold and provocative courtroom drama based on a real-life murder case. His first choice for the female lead was Lana Turner, one of Hollywood's most bankable glamour queens. But Turner was fired before filming began, dismissed over a dispute about her wardrobe demands. Preminger needed someone else, someone who could carry the film's most complicated and dangerous role. He chose Lee Remick. The character was Laura Mannion, the young wife of an army officer who claimed she was raped, triggering her volatile husband to commit murder. Laura's credibility is questioned throughout the trial. Is she a genuine victim or a calculating manipulator? Preminger needed an actress who could hold that ambiguity without ever tipping her hand. Lee did it perfectly. She played Laura as a flirtatious enigma, a woman whose natural sensuality both charmed and obscured the truth. In the film's most iconic scene, she lounges on a sofa in tight capri pants and dark sunglasses, answering the questions of defense attorney Jimmy Stewart with a slow, purring ease that leaves the entire courtroom and the entire audience utterly uncertain what to believe. The New York Times noted that Remick had a gift for portraying women who were by turns enticing and tormented. It was a dual quality that would define her greatest performances. Anatomy of a Murder was both a critical and commercial success, and overnight it transformed Lee Remick from a promising newcomer into a genuine Hollywood star. Time magazine dubbed her America's answer to Brigitte Bardot, marveling that this wholesome-looking New England girl could smolder on screen with such effortless sensuality. She was barely 23 years old, and she was just getting started. Her next challenge was the one that would prove beyond any doubt that she was far more than a pretty face. In 1962, director Blake Edwards cast her opposite Jack Lemmon in Days of Wine and Roses, an unflinching portrait of a young couple destroyed by alcoholism. Lee played Kirsten Clay, a bright-eyed optimist who slides slowly and terribly into addiction alongside her husband. She shed every trace of glamour for the role. She made every stage of Kirsten's descent feel devastatingly, uncomfortably real. In one scene, a hungover Kirsten stares at her own reflection and delivers the film's darkest line with a trembling smile. "This is the way I look when I'm sober. It's enough to make a person drink." That single moment encapsulated everything extraordinary about Lee Remick as an actress. The humor and the horror held in perfect, heartbreaking balance. Both she and Lemon received Academy Award nominations for their performances. In an era when Hollywood starlets were routinely typecast in shallow, decorative roles, Lee had demonstrated, before the age of 30, a range that most actors spend entire careers chasing. Behind the magazine covers and the Academy Award nominations, behind the radiant smile and the effortless poise, Lee Remick's personal life was quietly fracturing. The early 1960s looked perfect from the outside. She was married to television producer Bill Colleran, whom she wed in 1957. She had 2 young children, a daughter named Kate, born in 1959, and a son named Matt, born in 1961. Life magazine ran a glowing spread of Lee baking in her suburban kitchen, presenting her to the world as the rare Hollywood star who had somehow managed to have it all. A great career, a loving family, a normal life. Friends marveled at her composure. Colleagues admired her warmth. Nobody, it seemed, was looking closely enough at the cracks. The pressure of sustaining both a burgeoning career and a young family was enormous. Long stretches away on location, the relentless demands of a profession that never truly clocked off, and perhaps most corrosive of all, the quiet, grinding reality of a spouse watching his wife become one of the most celebrated actresses in America while his own career remained firmly in her shadow. These were not the kinds of problems that made headlines. They were the slow, invisible kind. The kind that hollows out a marriage from the inside before anyone on the outside even notices something is wrong. By the mid-1960s, Lee had begun reaching beyond Hollywood entirely. Rather than consolidating her film career in Los Angeles, she returned to her first love, the stage. In 1964, she headlined the original Broadway cast of Anyone Can Whistle, an experimental and deeply unconventional new musical by a young composer named Stephen Sondheim. She played a radiant nurse opposite Angela Lansbury in a sharp satire of politics and manufactured miracles. The show was a notorious disaster, closing after just 9 performances. But the reviews for Lee herself were warm and admiring. Critics praised her lovely singing voice, her charm, her fearless commitment to a project that was always going to be a difficult sell. She did not choose safe. She never did. 2 years later, in 1966, she took on the lead role in Wait Until Dark on Broadway, a taut psychological thriller about a blind woman terrorized by criminals. Night after night, she held audiences in a state of suspended dread, earning a Tony Award nomination for Best Actress in a Play. It was a performance that reminded everyone who might have forgotten that Lee Remick had started on the stage, and that the stage was still very much hers when she wanted it. But off-screen, the marriage to Bill Colleran had reached its end. In 1968, after 11 years together, the couple quietly divorced. Lee was 32 years old, a single mother of 2 at the absolute height of her fame. She said almost nothing publicly about the split. She was far too private, far too dignified to turn her pain into copy for the gossip columns. But those who knew her understood that beneath the composure, there was real heartache. The warm, wonderful girl next door had learned, at considerable personal cost, that a perfect life on screen does not guarantee a perfect life anywhere else. And then, almost as if the universe had decided that Lee Remick's story needed one more layer of intrigue, her name began to surface in whispered conversations alongside one of the most powerful and iconic figures in American political history. Robert F. Kennedy. Attorney General of the United States, brother of a martyred president, A man whose own marriage was, according to biographers who came later, not quite as unimpeachable as his public image suggested. Lee and her first husband had moved in Kennedy circles during the early 1960s, attending White House events, supporting the Democratic Party with genuine conviction. After President Kennedy's assassination, Bobby reportedly drew closer to certain Hollywood friends, and according to some accounts written years after his death, Lee Remick was among those he may have drawn closest to of all. It was never confirmed. Ethel Kennedy dismissed the rumors entirely. Lee herself never spoke a word about it publicly, and those who knew her best doubted she would ever have betrayed her friend Ethel. But the rumor lingered. And in a strange way, it said something true about Lee Remick, even if the story itself was not. That at the height of the 1960s, in the most glamorous and turbulent chapter of American life, she was exactly the kind of woman that the most powerful men in the world found impossible to ignore. In 1970, Lee Remick made a decision that surprised almost everyone who knew her. She packed her bags, left Hollywood behind, and moved to London. The reason was love. She had met British producer William Kip Gowans while filming in England, and something about him, about the quieter, less performative world he represented, felt exactly right. They married that same year and settled into a Georgian townhouse in Chelsea, where Lee learned to make a proper English roast, walked her Labrador retriever along the Thames, and exhaled, perhaps for the first time in years, without a camera pointed at her face. It was a reinvention as deliberate as anything she had ever done on screen. The girl who had grown up in New York and become one of the defining faces of American cinema was now strolling through London markets on a Saturday morning like any other woman in her 30s who simply wanted a good life. She took roles in British films, including A Severed Head in 1971, a darkly comic adaptation of an Iris Murdoch novel. She appeared in West End stage productions. She kept working, but on her own terms, at her own pace, without the suffocating machinery of the Hollywood studio system breathing down her neck. And then, in 1974, came the role that would define the second great chapter of her career. The project was Jenny, Lady Randolph-Churchill, a lavish British-American television miniseries about Jenny Jerome, the glamorous and formidable American woman who became Winston Churchill's mother. Over 7 episodes, Lee aged from a vivacious young debutante catching the eye of Lord Randolph-Churchill to a seasoned, worldly grand dame quietly shaping the early career of the man who would one day lead Britain through its darkest hours. It was an enormous undertaking, demanding extraordinary range across decades of one woman's complicated life. Lee met every single moment of it. The response on both sides of the Atlantic was rapturous. British critics called her portrayal uncannily convincing. American audiences were transfixed. At the award ceremonies that followed, Lee swept the field. She took home the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Television Drama Series. She won Britain's BAFTA TV Award for Best Actress. Jenny was one of the earliest transatlantic miniseries blockbusters, and Lee Remick was its undisputed heart. It was the kind of performance that rewrites a career, that makes people see an actress they thought they already knew in an entirely new light. 2 years later, in 1976, Lee delivered something completely different and equally unforgettable. The Omen was a supernatural horror film about an American diplomat and his elegant wife who slowly come to suspect that their young son may be the literal Antichrist. Opposite Gregory Peck, Lee played Catherine Thorne with a maternal warmth so genuine and a mounting terror so convincing that she transformed what might have been a lurid B-movie premise into something genuinely chilling. The film was a massive box office success. introducing Lee Remick to an entire generation of younger viewers who had not been alive for Anatomy of a Murder or Days of Wine and Roses. Peck himself held her in the highest possible regard, describing her as having a femininity and mysterious inner strength that, in his words, graces every one of her roles and simply brings out the best in a man. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Lee had become what one television columnist would eventually call the gold standard of the TV movie. The kinds of scripts arriving at her door were, by her own sardonic assessment, often better than what Hollywood was offering its female stars on the big screen. "I make movies for grown-ups," she once said with characteristic dry wit. "When Hollywood starts making them again, I will start acting in them again." In the meantime, she worked with extraordinary productivity and consistency. In The Women's Room, based on Marilyn French's landmark feminist novel, she played a woman navigating the seismic shifts in American women's lives from the 1950s to the 1970s, earning an Emmy nomination for a performance the Washington Post called "as authentic a mother as ever seen on a screen." In Haywire, a miniseries based on the memoir of actress Margaret Sullivan's daughter, Lee gave an eerily precise portrait of Sullivan's ethereal charm and devastating mental decline, earning another Emmy nomination. In The Letter, she took on the role made famous by Bette Davis, a wife who murders her lover in a moment of madness in colonial Malaya, and made it entirely her own. In Nutcracker, Money, Madness, and Murder, she played a Manhattan socialite so consumed by greed that she manipulated her own son into committing murder, earning yet another Golden Globe nomination for making a genuinely monstrous woman disturbingly human. And in 1985, she returned to the stage for a landmark concert production of Stephen Sondheim's Follies at Lincoln Center, standing in a sparkling gown beside Broadway legends Barbara Cook and Mandy Patinkin, delivering her songs with a sardonic elegance that stopped the house cold. Here was a woman at the absolute peak of her powers. She had mastered Hollywood glamour and Hollywood horror. She had conquered British television and American television alike. She had proven herself on Broadway not once but multiple times across 2 decades. There was, it seemed, nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. The only thing that could stop Lee Remick now was something entirely beyond her control. In the spring of 1989, Lee Remick was on location in France working on a new film project when her body began sending signals she could no longer ignore. A persistent fatigue, a deep, nagging pain in her back that refused to go away no matter how much she rested. She sought medical advice. The tests came back, and the results were devastating. Tumors had been found in her kidneys and her lungs. The cancer was advanced. Lee Remick was 53 years old. She told almost no one. A woman who had spent her entire career deflecting personal questions with grace and a well-timed smile, she handled the diagnosis the same way she had handled every other difficulty in her life. Quietly, privately, with a composure that those closest to her found both admirable and heartbreaking. She shared the truth only with her family and her innermost circle of friends. To the outside world, she simply went quiet, prompting gentle speculation among fans and journalists who noticed her absence but received no explanation. Those who did see her during this period remarked that she remained remarkably upbeat. There was no self-pity, no public appeals for sympathy, just the same straightforward Yankee grit that had carried her from a tent theater on Cape Cod to the stages of Broadway and the screen of Hollywood. She was going to fight this the same way she had fought for every role she ever wanted, with everything she had. For a time, it appeared she was winning. After aggressive treatment, the cancer went into remission in 1990. And, true to her nature, Lee did not ease cautiously back into life. She leaped. She accepted what would have been a dream role, Desiree Armfeldt in a Los Angeles production of Stephen Sondheim's A Little Night Music. The character who sings Send in the Clowns. For a woman who had loved Sondheim's work since Anyone Can Whistle in 1964, it felt like a full-circle moment. Her fans were overjoyed at the prospect, but the cancer had other plans. As rehearsals were set to begin, Lee suffered a relapse. The disease had returned, and this time it had spread to her liver. On her doctor's orders, she withdrew from the production before opening night. It was a bitter blow, perhaps the cruelest of all, to be pulled back from the stage at the very moment she had fought her way back to it. But even then, she found a way to leave the room with her dignity intact. "At least I know when to quit while I'm ahead," she told the director as she bowed out. By early 1991, the options were dwindling. Lee and Kip Gowans made the decision to return to Los Angeles, to be near her children and the community that still adored her. The industry, understanding what was coming, moved quickly to honor her while she was still present to receive it. In January, she accepted the Women's International Center's Living Legacy Award via a heartfelt video message, too weak to travel in person. Then came April 29, 1991. Lee arrived on Hollywood Boulevard in a smart suit and hat, elegant as ever, to receive her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She was frail. Her face was puffy from treatment, her famous blue eyes sunken. But when the curtain was pulled from her terrazzo star, she gave the cameras that radiant smile one last time. Jack Lemmon stood beside her, holding her arm. "I love you, kid," he whispered, his eyes full of tears. "I know," she whispered back. Lee Remick never had a comeback, not because she needed one, but because she never truly went away. While other stars of her generation faded into nostalgia or disappeared into bitter obscurity, Lee simply kept working, kept choosing, kept showing up, with the same quiet conviction that had carried her from a Cape Cod tent theater to the most prestigious stages and screens in the world. The television work of her later years was not a retreat. It was a second flowering, every bit as rich and deliberate as the first. What she left behind is remarkable in its breadth. An Academy Award nomination before she turned 30. Multiple Golden Globe wins and nominations spanning 3 decades. A BAFTA, a Tony nomination, Emmy nominations, roles in landmark films, prestige miniseries, West End productions, and Broadway concerts. A career that refused to be confined to a single medium, a single decade, or a single kind of woman. But the numbers, impressive as they are, miss the point. What made Lee Remick irreplaceable was something far harder to quantify. Gregory Peck called it a femininity and mysterious inner strength. The New York Times called it a gift for portraying women who were by turns enticing and tormented. Those who worked alongside her spoke not just of her talent, but of her decency, her warmth, her absolute refusal to treat the people around her as anything less than equals. In an industry that routinely chewed people up and discarded them, Lee Remick remained, from first day to last, one of the good ones. In May 1991, just weeks before her death, a gala dinner was held in her honor aboard the Queen Mary in Long Beach. Gregory Peck delivered a moving tribute. The lights dimmed. A clip of a young, resplendent Lee Remick flickered on the screen. Tears glistened on her cheeks as she watched herself from another lifetime. "I was beautiful then," she murmured to the friend beside her. "Lee, you still have those eyes," came the reply. On July 2, 1991, Lee Remick died at her Los Angeles home, surrounded by her family. She was 55 years old. Private funeral services were held at Westwood Memorial Park, and at the close of the service, her children Kate and Matt rose and sang Anyone Can Whistle, the title song from the Sondheim musical their mother had poured herself into more than 25 years before. It was the most perfect farewell imaginable. A life that had begun with a girl sneaking into a summer theater on Cape Cod ended with her children singing at her home. She tried to be brave. She tried to be honest. By every measure that matters, she succeeded completely. There is a particular kind of Hollywood star that the industry never quite knows what to do with. Not the ones who burn brightest and crash hardest. Not the ones who play the game perfectly and collect their trophies on schedule. But the ones who simply refuse to be anything other than exactly what they are. Honest, uncompromising, quietly, stubbornly themselves. Lee Remick was that kind of star. She arrived in Hollywood as a fresh-faced girl from Massachusetts with a ballet dancer's posture and an actress's soul. She became one of the most celebrated performers of her generation without ever losing the down-to-earth quality her father had given her. She faced a broken marriage, the relentless typecasting of an industry that struggled to see past her beauty, and finally, a terminal diagnosis. And she met every single one of those challenges with the same clear-eyed Yankee dignity that had defined her from the very beginning. She did not rage against the dying of the light. She dressed well, showed up, held Jack Lemmon's hand, and gave the cameras one last smile. That was Lee Remick, all the way to the end. Talent gets you to the top. Character keeps you there. Until the very end. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more untold lives from the golden age of Hollywood, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Everyone tells YouTube that stories like this one are worth telling, and every new subscriber helps this community grow. If you would like to go deeper, come find us on Patreon, where every week we release a shorter audio episode covering everything from silent movie scandals to forgotten stars to the most disastrous productions in Hollywood history. Higher tiers get early access to videos and the right to request the next main series episode on your favorite star. A link is on screen now. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these remarkable lives.